With Watches and Wonders finally here, it's so exciting to see all the releases from all the brands. I'm having a great time going through it, as I'm sure you are as well. But my question is, when are we going to see Rolex get back to making a square watch again? With the popularity of square watches recently, I think Rolex has to have this on their radar, and eventually we will see a square watch from Rolex. First off, let's talk a little bit about the recent popularity of square watches. With social media taking off, it's given a great platform for people to share interests and styles, and watches is one of the things that has seen a real big influx of people because it's so easy to share your watches, and before there wasn't really a place where people could share them that easily. Now, the downside of social media is that we sort of get this style homogenization where a trend or a style becomes popular and everybody's after that same style or that same watch, and that's sort of what everyone's focused in on, and we lose sight of a lot of the other great products that are out there. One of those trends that we've been seeing is this sort of it girl watch, which is always a square Cartier, whether that's a Panthère or some variation of a tank. We see it so often on so many different influencers. They all have them. And the popularity is completely justified in my opinion. Cartier has been making incredible watches that look amazing for so long. The history's there, the quality's there, but these square Cartiers became the watch to have. And even if people didn't know about watches, that was still what they wanted. And it's a great way to get people who may not have been interested about watches into watches. Now, square watches have a long history of watchmaking. The first company to do it, as you might have guessed, is Cartier in 1904 with the Santos Dumont, originally for aviation. Pretty much all watch brands have dabbled in some sort of square or rectangular watch, especially in the Art Deco period. You know, the brands like Patek Philippe, AP, Piaget, and Rolex were making these square or rectangular or some sort of angular watch to fit the current style trends. There are a lot of really interesting and strange watches that came out of this period, but some real classics that are still popular today, like the Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso, the Cartier Tank, and a couple more that were born out of this era of watchmaking, and they just continue to be popular today. Now, Rolex was also one of the companies that was making square watches at the time. Notably, their Cellini line, which was replaced by the 1908 recently, they had a couple of square watches in that line, and two notable ones would have been the Prince and, more importantly, the King Midas, which has become really popular. Now, the King Midas is rumored to have been designed by Gerald Genta, but obviously that rumor was never confirmed by Rolex. But it does have a lot of the classic characteristics that a Gerald Genta watch has, like the AP Royal Oak or the Patek Nautilus, you know, and they have a lot of the same characteristics, so I'll leave that one up to you. Regardless, the King Midas is a stunning watch, and we're seeing prices hit up to 25,000 USD, or if the condition's good, even higher. But that just goes to show the demand that's there for Rolex lovers and this square watch. Now, Rolex haven't made a King Midas for a long time, and it didn't make that many of them, so that's also going to play into the hype around them. But eventually, Rolex got rid of the Cellini line altogether and replaced it with the 1908. And they haven't done a lot with the 1908. They haven't played around with it as a new line. But hopefully they will soon, and we can see some new variations coming out. Now, at the same time that Rolex was making these square watches like the King Midas, we also saw brands like Audemars Piguet making the Bamboo, which again is getting a lot of traction right now. And it's not square necessarily, but it is an angular watch that's quite different from a lot of the watches that we see today. You know, I think it's even fair to say that watches like the Nautilus and the Aquanaut have a square shape to them and are influenced by that design. They may not be perfectly square, but they do have that shape to them. And as we mentioned, those are Gerald Genta designed watches, and you know, he wasn't afraid to make unique designs. After the quartz crisis, as we move into the 90s and the early 2000s, Swiss watchmakers were really struggling, and it was reflected in the watches that they were putting out. You know, they didn't have the ability to put out extravagant or unique designs. A lot of the watches that were getting put out were just basic standard stuff that would sell and hopefully keep the company going. So we lost a lot of the really unique designs that we were seeing before the crisis. And because of this, watchmakers had to make a change, and people's mindsets start to shift about watches, that rather than buying a automatic watch to tell time accurately, that these were luxury timepieces, sort of status symbols. I can go diving or I can play tennis in my expensive watch. And so we saw a real boom in steel sports watches, and Rolex took full advantage of this. Rolex was able to capture a large part of the market during this time with watches like the Submariner that really fit what people were after. And during these rebuilding years, a lot of watchmakers didn't go back to making square watches. Now, Cartier, obviously being the sort of square watchmaker, stuck with their core lineup of watches that were square. So they were always there. And you saw Tag Heuer continue to make watches like the Monaco, whereas again, another iconic square watch. But apart from a few brands, the trend was really round watches. Ideally, stainless steel or precious metal with a ceramic insert and 200 meters of water resistance. Now, getting back to where we started this story and the rise of social media and how this helped to really blow up Cartier's watches in the mainstream profile, in a time where it seemed like every influencer on social media had a Cartier on, we saw brands started popping up just to make dupes of the Panther or make tank dupes. We even saw other brands starting to make their own version of a tank. Now, Richard Mille was on this trend early as well, but I don't think that Richard Mille is very accessible for the average consumer. So I don't really think that they're going to follow the trends or be any indication of what the trend is. They're making watches for a very different group. But regardless, in 2007, they released the RM016, which was a square watch. And just last year, they relaunched it, the RM016, as a skeletonized version. So it does start to play into the trend a bit. Another big watch brand that started to put out an angular or square watch was Bulgari with the Octo Finissimo, which had incredible success and really sort of brought Bulgari back to the forefront of watchmaking. Again, it's not necessarily square, but it's not round. It's definitely an angular watch that has a very square shape to it. And whether or not you think it's square, it's definitely a notion to the breakaway from round watches. Hublot, another big player, also made a square version of their popular watch, the Big Bang. Now, regardless of your opinion on Hublot, they are a big player in the watch industry. Another brand that came out with the square watch recently is Nomos with their Tetra. And there's been a ton of other smaller brands like this that have come out with square watches. I don't want to bore you, and we don't have time, so I won't get into all of them. But I think it just shows that, brands are starting to realize that there was demand for square watches. People wanted them. Now, a couple of brands isn't enough to indicate a full-blown trend in the market, but when the bigger players that sort of dictate what the trends really are started to follow, I think that was a big moment. Like, we saw AP recently released an edition. Again, it's a limited edition, but it's the Remaster 02, which is a very square watch, a little bit out there. But again, as a limited edition, this was a way for AP to dip their toe into the market on square watches without having to go full blown. They received a little bit of criticism on the 1159, the code 1159, when they launched that. So I think they're skeptical to go full blown into a square watch right away. But again, this was a way for them to test the market, see if people liked it. And then recently we just saw the Tech Philippe release the Cubitus as well. And I'm not going to get into the Cubitus in this video. I know it's highly polarizing watch, so maybe we'll talk about it in another video. But again, that was the perfect example of the big brands launching square watches. So after that, I think we could safely say that with all of the bigger brands, other than Rolex, starting to put out square watches, we're definitely in a trend now. Now, I've only been talking surface level with some of the major players, and I just want to talk about brands that are really more mainstream and accessible to the average person. And I understand that Rolex, AP, and Patek aren't necessarily accessible to the average person, but they do make up a large part of the watch industry. But I think for the purpose of this video, I just kind of wanted to keep it more focused on the majors that do drive the market and the trends and the styles, and that we really see on social media. However, another great example of a small brand that is starting to do this that I think you should check out is Toledo & Chan. They do beautiful brutalist square designs. I love them. Now this brings us back to our original question. With Rolex controlling about a third of the luxury watch market, when did they make their return to making square watches? Now, Rolex is famous for making very small changes to their watches year over year. We don't see big releases from them. They're not trying to really rock the boat too much. So they often just do small dial variation, or we'll see small movement improvements. That being said, it does look like this is one of those exciting years where we are getting a new Rolex lineup, the Land Dweller. It looks really interesting. I won't get into it in this video. We'll save that for another one, but it's exciting to see some new Rolex products. But for the most part, Rolex doesn't really like to rock the boat, and they don't need to. What they're doing is working, so there's no need to try and fix it. However, I think Rolex has to see that there is demand for square watches, and I hope that they do something with a 1908 line. We haven't really seen them do anything unique with it yet. It hasn't been out for very long, so I wouldn't expect them to do anything with it. But I think down the line, it would be great to see Rolex bring back something like the King Midas or another square variation of it where they can get into that market. Now, I don't think we'll see Rolex create a new lineup for this square watches. I think it would fall under the 1908 line, just like they did with their previous ones falling under the Cellini line. But again, it would be great to see them do something unique like that. This would also allow them to sort of do what Audemars Piguet did by testing the market with a square limited edition release, where they can really see, hey, is there demand? Do people like this? It's easy to get instant feedback on watches in today's industry. So what do you think? Is there a square watch obsession, or is it just a coincidence that brands are starting to look for new designs and square hasn't been done in a while, so they're just starting to look for something that's more unique? And will we see Rolex venture back into square watches anytime soon? Watches and Wonders is right around the corner, so we won't have to wait long to get our answer. So come back and check out the videos as we go through all of the releases from Watches and Wonders right here